an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, chapters 29 and 30, and The Traitor Queen, chapter 1. In these chapters, well, I really enjoy the start of The Traitor Queen, but I don't really know what to say about the end of The Rogue because I thought we had done this already. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. It's a shame because Ashleigh is in another time zone, everyone. And because of that, she isn't able to attend as consistently as she used to because it's difficult with her, how late it is there for her to get here. And due to that, I don't get the chance to get feedback from her in real time to the things that I'm saying in the chat. And I don't know if anybody, listening to this has not heard the other episode where Ashleigh did chime in, but she hadn't read these books ahead when she commissioned them. And so I've been very curious on how she's felt about them while she's reading them for the first time after commissioning them, because I feel like I don't really know what happened to this author, but this series feels very off the rails so far. And I am trying to get a sense of whether I'm alone in that or not. The main thing that I'm sort of struggling with here is, so during the last episode, I had said how Lilia was granted another chance. It turns out that's not officially decided until chapter 29, but it had felt so completely like a foregone conclusion based on the way that Sania said it, that when we get this decision here, it just feels like it's not as much of a shock as it would have been. And there are a couple of other things that happen in these chapters as well, that it just feels like we are retreading ground that we've covered already. So basically, I split up these last 4 chapters because there were 75 pages in all, and I felt like that was just too much to cram into one episode. But reading them now, it would have been no problem. I don't really feel like there is much in these last 2 episodes that adds to the conversation or changes absolutely anything. The only thing that occurs of major interest is, one, Sania being sent out to deal with Lorcan and that whole effort. And 2, the discovery by, Sari that somebody has discovered his hideout and that somebody knows who his daughter is. Those are really it. And otherwise, I just don't really know what her editor was thinking. Because there is so much conversation about things that we have already seen and read. As people reading these books, we are getting recaps of things that we don't need within conversations. And then things that I have desperately wanted to see, we're not getting. And it just continues to feel like this first book and second book could have easily been put together and made into one, stripped down a lot more. And I, by the end of this book, am really concerned about the third one. It starts off with much more stakes than the others have. It's felt more interesting. But I'm worried, Ashleigh. I am. And I feel like it's one of those things where I always get sad about being too negative in my recordings because I don't want somebody to feel bad that I don't like a thing that they love. But this is a weird situation where you haven't read these yet either. So I don't know if I'm doing that and making you sad, or if you felt this way as well when you were reading it and you are totally here for me sharing your frustration, or if you read it, you thought it was fine, and then when I bring some things up, you're like, oh yes, or no, I don't agree with that. You know, I'm just very, very like interested to hear, because as I have done with some books that I've covered, I go and check what the reviews are for that book that I just finished, just out of curiosity to see what the overall consensus is. And the second book got much better reviews than the first book. And I will say, as much as I felt like this book was also too stretched out, it was certainly not as plodding as the first book felt. I just don't really know why the author makes some of the choices that she does. And there are some people in the reviews who seem to agree with me, but we're in the minority. I definitely didn't feel like most people shared my viewpoint on this. So, you know, that makes me sort of wonder, is it just a writing style that just doesn't quite work for me? Is it that when you're reading something and recovering it, you pick up things that maybe wouldn't have gotten your attention the first read through? I don't know. But we start off chapter 29 with Lilia being told that, you know, she's going to be allowed back into school. And she's also told that Callan is going to be the one that is like her mentor, basically. He'll be the guardian that manages her. And then it turns out that she's going to be staying with Sania. So I found this sort of an interesting thing, like having Black Magician Callan as her guardian feels like an odd choice if they're going to have her living with Sania anyway. I sort of feel like they should go with Sania overall if they're going to be having this girl live with her. But later on, when they're deciding who they're going to send to Lorcan, they decide to choose Sania despite some like misgivings that they have about her, which they bring up. They talk about the fact that she has disregarded the rules a couple of times and decided to like leave the guild property when she wasn't supposed to. So maybe that factored into their decision, and they feel like Callan is much more rigid, and that's really what Lilia needs. It's things like this that I would have liked to see a little bit more on the decision-making process around it, but it's fine. And they have her like say her pledge again. And then, let's see. Lilia lets Sania take her out of the room, and she goes into the next room and she sees Anyi. And, this is a whole other thing that I'll get to, because her and Anyi, they finally kiss and make it official that they are together. And I will say that one of the negative reviews that I saw was mainly focused on the fact that this author includes too much homosexuality in her books, which you guys know exactly how I feel about that. The idea that because it's a homosexual romance makes it seem like it's being shoved in your face when we are totally fine with nothing but romance when it's heterosexual. That means that you're homophobic. It's not about the romance that's the problem for you. So, get fucked. Bye. I don't care. I just like, when I read reviews like that, I just want to reach through the screen and grab somebody by the face and just look at them and just spit in their face. So, Sania has to have this conversation with Dorian finally. She goes into town and she says, we should chat a little before I deliver the bad news. She's thinking that to herself. I was wondering how people would react if I had been chosen to be Naki's executioner, she told him. And he says, I don't think that they would resent you for it. And she says, but they would not be able to help thinking about it when they were around me. They would fear me even more. And he says, fear you? They don't fear you. They're intimidated by you, but that's different. They're scared of black magic, but they're not scared of you. You've shown them that it doesn't make a person into a murderer. And when she's like, yeah, but I've used it to kill, he's like, yeah, but you know what I mean. It isn't the same thing. And on the one hand, maybe he's right, but I do feel like what we have seen of the way she's treated points to them being scared of her. The body language that we've been told she receives from people who are standing near her. I mean, I want to believe Dorian, because overall what I'm hoping for is that the Kyrillian magicians as a whole begin to normalize black magic a little bit more, and that it stops being called black magic, first of all, which I don't care for. But this is like a type of magic that, yes, it can be abused. So can so many types of magic. And I just feel like the Kyrillians are at such a disadvantage in so many ways because they're unwilling to even explore this. And I think that's like their loss, you know? I just don't really feel like the restrictions that they have around it make a ton of sense. And it's just fear-based. And I don't know. I've been hopeful that's what the gradual acceleration of characters who have learned black magic has meant for the series. So when Dorian says they don't fear you, they're intimidated, I'm hoping that like that's really what's at the basis of things in general, and that means that people will kind of get over it as time goes on. But I'm not sure that that will even happen. And she says, I work as a healer, but I can never wear the green robes. I am a black magician. While I would not hesitate to defend Kyrillia again, that role is not the one I wanted. And finally she says, Dorian, I've been thinking a lot about us. And he says, there is no us, is there? Father came to see me, gave me the good news. Tylea will join the winter intake of novices. Callan is probably going to be taking over the search for Skellen. Why don't you go back to your village, he suggested. And Sania's like, wait, Callan is going to be taking over? The fact that she didn't know this already, to me, is really like a bad sign. And I feel like this is meant to be, they were preparing to be sending her off, even though there's this whole song and dance about them deciding who they're going to send to Sachaka. I feel like this points to the fact that they had sort of had an idea how they were going to handle this already. But yeah, she resisted the urge to jump out of her seat and march straight back to Osen's office. Unless Rothan may have made this up in order to give Dorian no excuse to stay in Imardine. But that seems a little extreme. So she said, I only asked him to see if Tylea could join the winter intake. So you were free to go home if working with me became unbearable after I told you that. And by that, she means that there's no us. And he asks, why can't there be? And she says, 'cause you're married. Because I don't want to hurt Alina and your daughters. And because if you hurt them, I would dislike you for doing that. And I would dislike myself. And he says, I see. Father said as much. He also pointed out that Alina and I didn't start getting along so badly until we came to Imardine. I was ready to try city life. She wasn't. So I found this kind of interesting because she has been not wanting to talk about things with Rothan, feeling like she needs to keep Dorian's secrets for him. But it turns out Rothan's totally wise to what's going on. And yet she doesn't seem surprised in this scene that he knows, you know. I kind of expected her to be like, oh, really? I didn't know that you had told him about it. But she's not. She kind of is just like rolls with him having talked about this specifically with his father which I feel like I would feel weird about if I were Sania and I had a mentor that had basically kind of saved my life. And that mentor's son had been considering leaving his wife for me. And I found out that mentor was aware of the whole thing. I don't know. I would feel kind of like pajiggity about that. And I don't know if that's just me or what, but, yeah, it's just, and the fact that like they weren't getting along so badly until they came here, that's like, it's so what it's like just the setting and being too close to her. 'Cause he makes it sound like it's like city life that doesn't agree with her, but we don't really see any evidence of that in particular. And I would like a little bit more. It's just sort of like really overall, this love triangle thing feels really underbaked. I don't know anything about Alina other than seeing her feeling threatened by Sania. I don't know anything about Rothan as a person beyond what we knew of him when they first met and the fact that he's a healer. Personality-wise, he has none to me. It's a similar thing that I've been saying. A lot of the characters in these books are very similar, and they start to kind of blend together, and they're all generally like good people, a lot of the main characters, in a kind of a bland way. And so there's not a lot to distinguish. Like, you know, the thing that makes Sari different isn't even really his personality. It's the fact that he is a thief. So he has a different set of morals that he functions by, but he still generally has a similar code in general regarding the way that he treats people, as Sania does, as apparently Dorian does, as Daniel does, as I feel like probably, oh my God, I keep wanting to say Alina, but that's his wife's name, Lilia does. And this whole thing with her, like, thinking maybe she's drawn to him and maybe she's not, I didn't feel any investment in that at all. Like, part of me was, like, into the idea of her deciding she was interested simply for there to be something that happened. I was like, you know what, Sania, you're kind of boring me, frankly. And I would welcome you deciding to have a torrid affair and do something morally questionable, because I just want you to, like, do anything. Let's look at really what Sania does in these two books. She's supposed to be at the forefront of trying to find Skellen. And she gets, like, she helps hunt down Larandra. It's kind of a passive thing where she's just summoned when they think that Larandra's going to be there. She blocks Larandra's powers. She blocks Lilia's powers unsuccessfully, as it turns out. Mind reads some people. She just seems to, like, be around as a tool when things are happening, but it doesn't really feel like Sania makes things happen. And I like, kind of don't know what to do with her anymore. Like, she's so wishy-washy about wanting to learn black magic, like, or knowing black magic, and the way that she feels about the guild. And she's, like, super understanding about their stance on things. I would like maybe a little bit more resentment from her towards the guild. I would like maybe if the whole thing with the Rowit seemed to go anywhere in this book. There's a whole thing with her thinking, like, Callan's taking it and overhearing him confirming that. And I really expected by the end of these chapters of this final, like, chapters of this second book, that something would have happened with that she would mention to someone, that Callan would get found out, that she would confront Callan. There is nothing. And it's just really weird. I don't really know what she's here for, other than to be a camera for us to see other things happening around her. It doesn't get me engaged with her as a character or on her side the way that I was when she was first introduced in the first books. I was very into Sania. She felt like a really reasonable character. And that was like what I liked about the first books was everybody is willing to actually talk to each other in a way that feels like I said, reasonable. They are willing to give each other a chance to explain themselves, maybe entertain doubts, but still like give people a chance. And it seems like that author has taken that into a different direction where I really enjoyed everybody's effective communication and the trust they tried to extend to one another. But you can't have everybody operate that way and still have a story that's compelling. You have to have people who don't care about the rules. You have to have people that have a very emotional reaction to something that maybe it's not appropriate to have that reaction to. You have to have people who are willing to see others get hurt for the things that they want. And we haven't seen any POV characters to whom that applies. Not a single one. And I really was so hopeful about the introduction of Lilia to the story because I thought this was going to be, yes, she's a sweetheart, but she is a fool who is easily duped, very gullible. And instead, everybody else is also easily duped and very gullible around her. So that sort of became a wash where I expected that to be a point of interest, and it wasn't really. I mean, we have this whole thing that started in the first book with people being murdered and us looking for a magician who is supposedly murdering people. And in this second book, all we're talking about is trying to find Skellen because we think maybe he's linked to the murders. Maybe Larandra was committing them or not, but nothing, I repeat, not a damn thing about that gets wrapped up here. None of it is even wrapped up is too much for the second book. I shouldn't even have said none of it gets wrapped up because I wouldn't expect it to be in the second book. But I don't get the sense anything regarding that plot moved forward in any way of any kind at all, except for the fact that Larandra was aided in escaping by Lilia. And that has seemed to have no discernible effect on the city. I really expected us to hear about more murders happening, but no. And was it supposed to be that the murders that they were concerned about that were occurring were all down to Naki? I don't think so. And if they were, that would kind of render Skellen sort of moot. So I don't think so. But it just feels like there is a plot thread that got started in the first book that we turned into something else for the second book and then completely fumbled and kind of forgot about and left hanging in such a way that I personally don't care anymore if they find this murderer. I don't care about Skellen either. Nothing has seemed particularly frightening about him recently. You know, we have a bit of a close call with Anyi and Lilia because they were going to try and kind of use Lilia as leverage. And so, Anyi helped Lilia escape and there was that whole thing. But Skellen, as a person, doesn't appear once in this book. And nobody we've talked about seems to have seen him even. I don't know what this second book was really for, other than Lilia's experience with Naki and Daniel learning about the stones in conjunction with Lorcan learning about the stones. And to be honest, I don't really need both Daniel and Lorcan. I feel like those two characters could have been sort of fused together, and that whole storyline tightened up a lot more. We could have somebody get captured by the whole thing that happens with Lorcan being captured, this trade that he has. How about then he tries to get back to Kirelia after he's released, and he winds up being able to take a trip to the Duna after he's brought to the guild house and investigate all of this stuff himself with the knowledge that he already has about the Store Stones. Both of them doing these two things that have a lot to do with one another, to the point that we don't need that. And Sania's not doing a whole lot. Really, we just have her as a POV at the guild. What if we had her, like, the thing is, I think maybe the author boxed herself into a corner a little bit by putting Sania under such strict restrictions about her movements. And so we're not able to see as much because she doesn't have the freedom to like go out and investigate things the way that she otherwise would. But this is when you come up against, this world is supposed to have magic in it. And we just don't see a whole lot of that in these books. The first books, magic feels like it's being performed fairly frequently. And it's not a main event thing. That's not really the focal point of these books, despite the fact, that that's what the fights are about, is magic. It doesn't feel like that's super relevant. But what if Sania was able to change her appearance a little bit more? What if she was more willing to break the rules than she is, and is living kind of a double life? And we get to see a lot more of what's going on with the thieves and what's going on with Skellen, because she has decided to prioritize the lives of the people in the city over what these jumpy magicians are afraid of, that she knows she's not guilty of, nor would she ever. Wouldn't that be more interesting? Guys, what's so frustrating anytime that I come up against things like this is that there is an author out here who has created a universe with so much potential, and then it just feels like they choose to not explore the things that are the most interesting. And so you are sitting there as a reader waiting for something that never quite comes. And I don't know, there's just I feel like I'm sort of ranting this episode, and I'm sorry, but like, I really expected more from these last two chapters. I would never have done them separately if I knew that it's a bunch of recovering what we already saw. So she tells Dorian, basically, I'm not interested. I'm not going to have an affair with you. You better go home. And he does. And that's it. Why did we need this storyline? What did that do for us? It didn't help me learn anything about Sania. I knew that she wasn't the type to go and have a torrid affair. She wasn't even that drawn to him. It wasn't ever really a temptation for her. Why would you write it so that she is so indifferent in the first place? If you're going to have a potential love triangle, you need to have some attraction there, real attraction, for there to feel like there are any stakes at all. And it was not really a question. I questioned whether or not she would do it simply because I couldn't see why the author would include it in the story if she wasn't going to follow through on it and have her get involved with him. And maybe in the third book, suddenly his wife dies and he's single. And all of a sudden she realizes that now that the door is open and I can do this in a more moral way, I am interested. But as of right now, this felt like a giant waste of time. So then we go to Lorcan, and he is wearing his new robes and really like kind of enjoying the luxury of them, but also remembering like the fact that this signifies a massive change, because he now knows black magic and he shouldn't be wearing the purple anymore. He should be wearing black. So he leaves his rooms and Maria is waiting for him, and she has a blood ring to converse with his mother. So when I talk about like getting coverage of stuff that we've already seen, we see the whole conversation. We read the whole conversation between him and his mother. So he gets in touch. Mom, are you all right? Are you free to talk? Yes. Wait, I have a patient. Pause. I'm alone now. Where are you? I'm at the guild house in Arvis. Queen Zarala sent me. She sent me on a mission. Queen Zarala? Of the traitors. You're working for her now? Yes, but she knows I'd have never agreed to any task that would endanger the allied lands. That's considerate of her. A few problems were resolved in the guild. We have another black magician. 2 novices managed to learn it from a book. One learned it deliberately and killed with it and tricked the other into learning it so that she would be blamed for murder. The first has been caught and executed. The other proved herself honorable enough to be allowed back into the guild and the university, though with conditions. We know we don't need to hear all of this. You know, I feel like the author felt the need to go through every detail so that we could see Lorcan reflecting on the fact that they seem to be a bit more flexible about the black magic thing with this girl, and that gives him hope that maybe they'll be more flexible with him. But we can definitely have him thinking about that later after this conversation, and we don't need to see the whole conversation. We can just get... She filled him in on what happened with Lilia, and Lorcan couldn't help but be surprised to hear that she was being allowed to return to classes. That's interesting. You know, we don't need this entire back and forth. And then, you know, what's this mission the Traitor Queen has sent you on? To negotiate an alliance between the traitors and allied lands. Oh, the whole thing. The Queen sent me here because the route to the pass is not safe at this time of year. And... He tells her that she used to communicate with him. Something prevented him from returning after her daughter died. She stopped using the ring. A sickness had sucked the traitors and killed many he was blamed for because they believed healing would have saved them. That wasn't all there was to their bargain, however. Yo, we know. Lady, what are you doing? We read the book. Why do you do this right now? And like, it would be one thing if this were placed at the beginning of the next book, because it would feel more like, oh, she's doing an exposition dump to remind us what happened in book 2. But this is at the end of the book we just read. No. And the one thing I'll say about this conversation is there is a sense to Sania of almost like being jealous of the Traitor Queen. Like she suspects maybe something romantic happened between her and Acheron until he mentions like how much older than Acheron she is. But that's it. And this conversation, guys, this pages, like 7 pages long. The only thing that we learn that's new is the fact that actually we don't learn anything new. I was going to say that Daniel contacted Osen, but we were there for that conversation. The gemstone thing we know. Yeah, the only thing that we know here is him finding out that Daniel had been in Duna just like 2 days ago, and so he assumes that, or Lorcan finds out Daniel had been there in Duna 2 days ago, and so he figures it will be a long time before Daniel is able to return. But then there's that storm, which we already know about by this point, and so there's no... The fact that he thinks Daniel is going to take a long time to return doesn't influence anything he does. He doesn't choose different actions because he figures Daniel won't be back in time. So he's going to begin taking care of business on his own. As far as we know, that influences nothing. So there's no need for that either. Just this entire conversation, this happens again at another point, and almost this whole chapter was nothing. So then we go to chapter 30, The Choice. And I'll be honest, The Choice is like, there's one that I feel like they're trying to do the choice, like, maybe this applies to both people. Because Lilia has to choose whether or not she is going to sort of, like, not run off with Anya, but, like, break the rules to be with Anya. And then there's the guild's choice on who they're going to send to, you know, kind of play point on the deal with the traitors. But with Lilia, like, we find out at the beginning of the next book that she has agreed to, like, break the rules, and she is going off with Anya. Excuse me. But by the end of this book, I wasn't totally sure whether that was even going to be a thing, because Lilia seems like she's afraid to break any rules at this point, which I do kind of understand after everything that has happened. But anyway, so Lilia is, like, dealing with a lot of catch-up work because she missed the exams over the winter, and she just missed a lot of classes, and they are expecting her to catch up on it and follow through and with everything that is still on her plate. Everything that she is already, like, that she is being assigned is still what she should be doing, as well as the catch-up work, which that is a lot. It is understandable that she is feeling pretty overwhelmed here. And it says, at least she could do the extra study in her room adjoining Sania's guest room, where it was quiet and the antics of her fellow novices wouldn't distract her. After today's classes, she suspected she would be doubly grateful for that. The other novices had ignored her when they weren't giving her dark, suspicious looks. Her old friends had made it clear they did not want anything to do with her now. Would they eventually forget what she had done? Or would they continue to show their disapproval and fear, perhaps in other nastier ways? So that's something that's sort of interesting. I am personally pretty curious about that, the way that they're going to behave with her, because it does feel like, you know, we've seen the way that Sania was treated, and that was just regarding the black magic thing. I would imagine that now we have the whole Lilia is gay thing to deal with as well. And the only reason that I'm sort of doubtful about that is because that's not mentioned in her concerns. She seems to be purely worried about whether or not they disapprove of her with the black magic thing. And later on, she says to Anya that she has to worry about the motives of anybody who gets close to her, because what if somebody is acting as if they want to be her friend, and in fact they just want to learn black magic, which I really liked that concern being raised, because it hadn't really occurred to me. But that would be a bummer to, like, think that somebody was actually trying to be cool with you and then find out they don't give a shit about you at all. They're just trying to use you to get to some information. But yeah, so she is, I would be interested to hear if there is, like, homophobia mixed in with the way that she's being treated. But anyway, Anya comes in and she's wearing this new coat that Lilia got her. And I like the fact that Anya is, like, a little bit vain. She's very happy with this coat and very much like, oh, it looks good on me, don't it? And honestly, I'm pretty here for that kind of attitude. Like, look, we all need to feel good about ourselves. And I am 100% that type. And it's always nice to see another character who is painted as being somewhat vain without that being without the character being a villain of some kind, because I feel like that can often be paired together. We see a lot of this character is vain because they are a bad person. So I do appreciate that Anya is like, you know, we can have both. She can be vain and she can also be doing the right thing. And I say the right in quotes because, like, she is a thief and she does shady shit, but she has a good heart. It seems pretty clear to me. So this is when she kneels down, and kisses Lilia. And she says, I know it's too soon since Naki, but I thought you should know in case you're interested. And Lilia is like, girl, it's not too soon. That's fine. I don't mind. And I really enjoyed that moment of her just being like, Naki who? Because it wouldn't be outrageous for her to be like, it is a little bit too soon. She was framed for murder. If it felt too soon for her, I would respect that. I wouldn't be mad at her. But I do really love that she is so quickly like, no, that's fine, no problem. And finally, Ani said, I'd hate for Sunita to walk in on us or her servants. How much do you know about the passages? Unless you're really serious about not breaking rules anymore, I could take you on a little tour. And Lilia says, I'll think about it. And then we cut to Sania. So this is when they are deciding, and let's see. Rothan looked up at her and smiled. She felt an answering smile spring to her lips. He had been overjoyed to hear of Lorcan's return, and since learning that Lorcan would be attempting to negotiate an alliance and would be bringing the guild a new kind of magic, he had been bursting with pride. At one point, he'd sighed and looked sad, and when Sania had asked what was wrong, he'd looked at her apologetically. She winced as she remembered what he'd said. It is a pity his father never got to see this. Which had made her heart ache for more than the obvious reasons. For Rothan to have said this of Acheron indicated a level of forgiveness of the former High Lord that Sania had not thought Rothan would ever reach. Okay, so here's a good example of some shit I could have done with more of. I had no idea Rothan was still bitter and holding a grudge, basically, against Acheron. And I would have loved to hear about Sania coping with the fact that a man who was her mentor and whom she deeply respected, maybe despised, or at the very least deeply disapproved of, a man she was in love with and had a child with. I had no idea about this. Why is this the first I'm hearing of him, like, holding on to this in this way? Did I miss something? Was this mentioned? I'm honestly asking because I feel like I don't think it was mentioned, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was. When that's said here, I was just like, wait, what? And I would have liked some more conversations about, this is the problem too with time jumps, you know, we go from Sania finding out that she's pregnant to a whole other character with going back into the past and the origins of what happened with Kirelia and T'Chaka and the wasteland and everything. And then we come back to Sania and it's been 20 years, I think. So there's a lot like that we missed, but we don't really get caught up on a whole lot of it, evidently. And honestly, surprisingly little has really changed in a material sense. But yeah, I felt that was really compelling, and I would have loved to see Sania wrestling with that, with two men who, like, basically were both very good people who wanted what was best for the people of Kirelia, had really different ideas of how to achieve that. And what if Rothan held it against her son a little bit? What if he was weird about that? Or what if, like, I don't, you know, like there's just so many avenues that you could sort of take. And I don't know. I found that kind of fascinating, and I couldn't believe that it was just mentioned so casually, and then we move right on with the story. So Osen says the High Lord met with the king this evening. He has gained the agreement of the other leaders of the allied lands. The meeting will take place and negotiations entered into. They've indicated their preferred terms and agreed that a guild magician will represent the allied lands. The king has left the choice of representative to us. There's no small risk involved. If King Amakira learns of the meeting, he will try to prevent it. the king of T'Chaka. He may even see it as an act of war. We are, in effect, considering an alliance with the people he considers rebels and traitors. Whoever we send will be vulnerable. We could send the entire guild and not be strong enough to counter an attack. Amakira would hardly fail to notice if we send an army of magicians his way. For this reason, we've decided that only 2 magicians will go. However, 2 of us have the potential to be as strong as an army of us. And Sania is like, oh shit. They're going to send a black magician. And she thinks at first they're going to send both her and Callan. And then Balkan says, nope, we're going to send 1 black magician and an assistant who will be willing to offer their magical strength. Since there is a risk that if attacked, the 2 magicians' minds will be read, the assistant cannot be a higher magician or know any more about the purpose of the trip than necessary. The black magician will wear Lord Leden's mind read blocking ring. So they debate very openly about who they are going to send, and Sania is the one that is chosen. And I don't think that they choose a assistant for her, and I don't imagine that they would send Lilia. So I'm curious who that would be. Let's see. I'm not sure if I should congratulate you or not, Osen said to her. Sania smiled wryly. It's reassuring, even flattering, that you're willing to entrust me with the task, especially when I failed at the last one you set me, which is finding Skellen. And Callan will be taking that over. Will your contacts consent to work with him? And she says, yeah. And Lilia befriended one of my contact's friends. It might be beneficial to her if she was to be his assistant or one of them on this. So yeah, she's not going to be coming with her. Now, do you have anyone in mind to take as your assistant? Forcing her mind back to her new task, she considered the question and nodded. I'm real curious about that. I wonder who she's taking, because I don't think we find out about that by the end of this. So then we go back to Daniel, and basically we just get a lot more of like tie-in cock blocking and sort of interfering with Achadi, and eventually the arrival back to the guild house and him realizing that Lorcan is back. And Tyann goes off to like shower and everything and leaves Daniel and Lorcan alone. And Daniel opens this letter that Lorcan was given by the king that says he forbids Lorcan to leave, tells him that he'll be summoned to meet with him once Daniel has returned. And Lorcan's like, can he stop me from leaving? And am I required to meet with him? And Daniel's like, I mean, yes and no. Like, you cannot do it, but also you're on his turf and you're taking a risk doing that. But if he pressured you, he's taking a risk doing that. So we kind of do have to cooperate and be polite, at least for right now. And Lorcan's like, so BT Dubs, since you didn't know I was here when you got home, you didn't talk to Osen yet, right? And he says, I can't discuss anything aloud in case we're overheard. You need to contact Osen now. So at the very least, we don't have to see that conversation. And then we go to the epilogue, which is very short. And Sari comes into this room with Gaul and Anyi waiting. And they go into a, let's see. Oh yeah, Sari's thinking about Callan and thinking about how he doesn't exactly trust Callan the way that he trusted Sania. He's like, yeah, the man's trying to follow the law. He's not like dirty or anything, but that can lead to its own rigidity. That's in its way dangerous because he's going to make maybe some stupid decisions without being flexible in the moment about what needs to be done. So they go into the hideout room. Sari sat down. A bottle of wine and 3 glasses had been set on the table. Is there something to celebrate? He asked. They turned to regard him, their expressions puzzled. And they both are just like, we didn't bring that. And he looks at a tag on the bottle and it just says, for your daughter. And he's like, we need to get the fuck out. And that's where that ends. And I got so frustrated because like that was the first really exciting thing that happened. And that was the epilogue. And then that's it. So I decided to go on and do the first chapter of the next book. So we get a weird thing at the start of the next book. There is a mistaken belief in Imardin that printing presses had been invented by magicians. Anyone unaware of the workings of presses and magic could easily gain the impression, from the spectacular noise and convulsing actions of the machine, that some sort of alchemy was taking place. But no magic was required, so long as someone was willing to turn the wheels and operate the levers. And there's this thing that's particularly a printing service was then offered to the houses for free and to anyone from other classes for a charge, to which I'm just like, oh man, more on the fucking rich getting shit for free when they don't need anything for free. The downside was the boom in popularity of the romantic adventure novel. A recently published one featured a rich heiress rescued from her luxurious but boring life by a young, handsome thief. The fights were laughably implausible. And basically, there's a woman that he is staying with named Kadia, who is offering to let him stay in her bed. They're clearly having sex. And she is really enjoying this romance novel and reading him chapters before they go to sleep. And he can tell that like he fits into this fantasy for her and it's working out for them for the time being, but it quickly begins to fall apart. But I found this actually pretty funny. Let's see. He wondered if she really believed he was a thief or if he simply fitted well enough into her fantasy that she didn't care if it was true or not. He was not the dashing young thief of the novel and certainly didn't have the stamina for the adventures described either in bed or out of it. And then his next line is, I'm getting soft. And I was like, bad phrasing, Sari, come on. But it comes up a couple times in this chapter that he is feeling his age, and he notices Gaul feeling his age as well. They're both breathing hard. They're both having trouble keeping up. And it kind of worries me that they're going to wind up becoming like victims due to the fact that they are getting older and they're less fast and just can't quite keep up. Because Gaul winds up pretty severely injured at the end of this. So he hears this like thump from the next room, and he opens the door and looks out, and he sees Anya standing over Gaul with a blade in her hand. And he kind of yells out like, what the fuck? And then the person turns around and he realizes that it is not Anya at all. And this person tries to stab Gaul and he stops her. And he turned to see another struggle was underway at the second makeshift bed, only this time it was the intruder who was pressed to the mattress, holding back the hands that held a knife hovering just above his chest. She must have woken just in time to catch the assassin and turned his attack against him. So at this point, they're able to fight these people off. Let's see. Sari ducked away from the spray of blood as Ani withdrew her knife, knocked the assassin's knife from his hand, then finished him with a stab to the heart. With Gaul's help, of course, Sari turned to see how his friend was faring and was relieved to see the female assassin lying in a growing pool of blood on the floor. And they're basically like, okay, so it's time to go. And they go down into the tunnels and they realize that there is somebody in pursuit. Kadia, meanwhile, the woman that he was sleeping with, she asks Sari what she should do, and he says to follow him. So she goes down into the passages with him. And let's see. Sari handed her the lamp and pointed in one direction. In 100 paces or so, you'll see a grate high on the left wall. Beyond it is an alley between two houses. There'll be grooves in the wall to help you climb up, and the grate should hinge inward. Go to one of your neighbors and tell them there are robbers in your house. If they find the bodies, say they're the robbers and suggest one turned on the other. If you don't find them, drag them into the passages and don't let anyone into the cellar until the smell goes away. So this one, let's see. If they find the bodies, is he thinking that maybe whoever tried to attack them will come and clean up their mess and the bodies will be gone? If that's true, then why does he say drag them into the passages and don't let anyone into the cellar? Or is he saying maybe they won't go and investigate right away? I wasn't totally clear on that. And he gives her a kiss and tells her it's been a pleasure. And she kind of gives him a little sly, like, yeah, what's up? Look before they go. As they're heading down the tunnel, they hear a sound. And they think at first maybe it was just Katia closing the grate behind her. But they're like, no, that wasn't metal. That was wood. Something's happening. And they wind up being pursued at a pretty intense pace, to the point where Sari's starting to really think he's not going to be able to manage this. And eventually they get towards the territory of this community, which I forgot what they keep being called. If they follow, they'll discover the guild. Oh, right, because he doesn't want to lead them, whoever this is, to the tunnels that go under the guild. And really, that's the only place that he can think of to go. He had one other alternative. It was a riskier one. Gull, realizing what Sari intended, cursed under his breath. It had been over a decade, nearly 2, since dozens of street urchins had made a new home in the tunnels after the destruction of their neighborhood. They soon became the subject of scary stories told in bullhouses and to terrify children into obedience. It was said that the Sligs never ventured into the sunlight and only emerged at night via sewers and cellars to steal food and play tricks on people. Some believed that they had bred into spindly, pale things with huge eyes that allowed them to see in the dark. Others said they looked like any other street urchin until they opened their mouths to reveal long fangs. What all agreed on was that to venture into Slig territory was to invite death. From time to time, someone would test that belief. Most never returned, but a few had crawled out again, bleeding from stab wounds delivered by silent, unseen attackers in the dark. So this is a pretty cool thing, and it is a little suspect that these dudes were never mentioned in the previous books, and now all of a sudden they're apparently a whole thing. But I'm willing to let that go because I do just find this interesting. And Sari has been apparently, lucky for him, delivering them food at a pretty regular interval with the marking for his name, the little rodent, on a tag attached to the bags of food. So they will associate him with generosity and hopefully give him a bit of a break if he ever needs it, which is exactly what he counts on here. And it does pay off for him. So they meet this man named Wen, who, and these people, it seems like they speak English, but it's not they're not either super fluent, or maybe some of them are from other countries and didn't know English and came down here, or they just don't interact with regular people enough to need to learn. Wen, this name I know, one who leaves food, what we do. And eventually they take him to Worm, who appears to be their leader. And this is such a weird moment. He stared at Sari intently, then nodded. "You are Sereni," he said. He extended a hand. "I am Worm." Sari held out his hand, unsure what the gesture meant. Really? They don't even shake hands in this universe? I found that really surprising. That caught me way off guard. And basically what this dude does is we will help you get out into an area that will be safe, but you definitely can't stay down here. And if you need our help again, use my name and they'll help get you somewhere you need to go. But you aren't going to be allowed to be down here for any like particular length of time. And Sari is sort of surprised when he sees the place, especially. Like, I think he expected, like, really gross open sewers with, like, raw sewage in them. But instead it seems to be a lot of, like, mostly clear water that's got, like, soap and stuff in it. And the place doesn't seem too terrible. It's just really, really damp and dark. You know, it's underground. And he's sort of like, yeah, actually, this isn't a terrible place to be. I could see this being appealing if you don't have anywhere to go. And Worm, it's very clear, knows more about Sari than Sari expected. He knows that about, like, the tunnels going into the guild. He just, like, and also their territory is, like, right underneath Sari's territory. And he had no idea any of this was here. So they're a little bit smug about that. And let's see. Yeah, Worm says, Skellum won't let us alone like you do. He will want those because he wants what they lead to. And he's pointing at the tunnels that go to the guild. You can't stay. We will take you out in a safe place, but that is all. Where do you want to go? And Sari tells him, take us back the way we came. So they get out of there and they go and hunker down in the room where Anyi and Lilia sneak off to. And this is when Gol sits down and kind of begins to sway. And they realize he got fucking stabbed. And he's been, like, running along with them this whole time, bleeding out. And they had no idea. And they need to find some, like, medical assistance. And they're like, who are they going to get down here, you know? So Anyi is like, well, obviously, I need to go and find Lilia. She might be gone already. But there's no other option, really. So she leaves Sari with his hand over the wound and goes off to see if Lilia has already left for classes or not. If she's not there, at least get something clean to use as a dressing. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading as she hurried into the darkness. So that's it. That's the end of chapter 1. So I feel like that's a strong start for this book. I really was so disappointed in the way the last book ended. I'm hopeful that now that we're coming down to the wire, this book will be forced to have more action in it, and that she'll just be kind of up against a wall with trying to solve a lot of problems that she started, you know. Anyway, I'm going to wrap up. I'm sorry, Ashleigh. Thank you for the commission, and I'm sorry that I was so negative about this. I really do want to hear your thoughts about it, too. So let me know what you're thinking on this. And yeah, I will be seeing you all again pretty soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.